What would you do if the very people meant to maintain your community started tearing it apart? If the rules they claimed were for your benefit were actually just a tool to control you? When I bought my house, I thought I had found my little slice of paradise. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns were well kept, and for the first few months, everything was exactly as I had hoped. It wasn't a luxury estate, but it was home. A place where I could finally settle down, build my future, and stop worrying about rent increases or unreliable landlords. For once, I was in control of my own space. Or so I thought. It all started with a simple, logical decision, one that should have been celebrated, not condemned. My energy bills were getting out of hand, and I had been reading up on solar panels. Not only would they save me thousands of dollars in the long run, but they would also reduce my carbon footprint. It was a no-brainer. I went through all the necessary steps, permits, contractor approvals, and, most importantly, I checked the HOA regulations. The rules were clear. There was nothing prohibiting solar panels as long as they met city guidelines. The installation went smoothly, and within weeks, my roof was lined with sleek, efficient panels. The difference in my energy consumption was immediate. I was thrilled. For the first time in months, I felt like I had made a decision that would truly improve my life. But what I didn't realize was that in my neighborhood, making smart, independent decisions was practically a crime. At first, it was just a feeling. Neighbors staring as I pulled into my driveway. Conversations that used to be friendly now ending abruptly when I walked by. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they didn't know much about solar energy. But then, a letter arrived. A neatly typed envelope, tucked inside my mailbox, with the bold, unmistakable HOA letterhead. My stomach twisted as I pulled it out. Notice of compliance meeting, discussion of unauthorized property modifications. My heart pounded as I reread it. Unauthorized? I had followed every rule. But the moment I saw the signature at the bottom, Mr. Whitman, HOA President, I knew exactly where this was going. And I had no idea just how far they were willing to take it. I showed up to the HOA meeting thinking it would be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe a clerical error, a miscommunication. After all, I had done everything by the book. But the moment I stepped into the room, I knew I had walked straight into an ambush. A long table stretched across the front of the room, with 7 HOA board members seated like a jury, their expressions cold and unreadable. At the center, Mr. Whitman, the HOA president, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at a stack of papers like he was preparing for a courtroom battle. To his right, Karen, the most vocal and notoriously difficult board member, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, wearing the smug, satisfied expression of someone who had already decided they had won. Before I could even sit down, Whitman spoke. "We've received multiple complaints about your solar panels. They're not in line with the community's aesthetic." I blinked. Aesthetic? That was the issue? "They're barely visible from the street," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "And I followed all the guidelines, city permits, HOA rules, everything." Karen let out a quiet scoff, shaking her head as if I was a naive child who just didn't get it. "It's not just about what's in the rulebook, Ethan. It's about preserving the integrity of our neighborhood." Integrity? I could feel my pulse quicken. "Are you saying I need to remove them?" Whitman folded his hands together like he was offering me some kind of reasonable compromise. "We're asking that you do what's best for the community. We'll give you 30 days. That was it. No discussion. No justification. Just a demand disguised as a request. I wasn't about to roll over. "And if I don't?" Karen's smirk widened. "Then we'll have to escalate the situation. You'd be surprised what an HOA can do when someone refuses to cooperate." I left the meeting furious, but determined. They had no legal ground. I contacted Mark Reynolds, my lawyer, who reassured me that the HOA couldn't force me to remove something that was legally installed. I drafted a formal response, refusing to comply, and expected that to be the end of it. But Karen wasn't done with me. Within a week, the petty retaliation began. Random fines started showing up in my mailbox. My lawn, which was cut at the same length as everyone else's, was suddenly too long. My trash bins, placed exactly where they'd always been, were now in violation of community standards. Even cracks in my driveway, barely noticeable, were deemed potential safety hazards that needed to be immediately addressed. At first, I thought it was just Karen flexing her power, but when I started looking closer, I realized she was breaking HOA rules herself. One evening, while walking my dog, I noticed Karen's backyard had an illegal gazebo, a structure that wasn't approved under HOA guidelines. She also had a decorative fountain and a set of string lights that violated the very same aesthetic rules she claimed to be enforcing on me. I took pictures. At the next HOA meeting, I casually brought it up. I couldn't help but notice some non-standard modifications on your property, Karen. I assume you got special approval? Her face went tight. My modifications aren't an eyesore. I let out a humorless laugh. Neither are my solar panels. Karen waved a dismissive hand. This isn't about me, Ethan. It's about the community. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And things were about to get worse. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My solar panels weren't producing as much energy. At first, I thought it was a technical issue, but when I checked, the wiring had been tampered with. Someone had cut the connections. I immediately reported it to the HOA. Karen's response? A fake, syrupy sweet voice dripping with condescension. Maybe you should be more careful. Accidents happen. That was the last straw. I installed security cameras and started documenting everything. The fines, the threats, the sabotage. If they thought they could intimidate me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because I was about to take this fight to the next level. The next morning, I woke up to something even worse than the tampered solar panels, a brand new rule added to the HOA guidelines. A rule that hadn't existed when I installed my panels. I stared at the notice in disbelief. The HOA had rushed through an emergency vote, updating their regulations to explicitly ban solar panels, even though they'd never been an issue before. The rule was retroactive, meaning they were trying to use it against me even though my panels had been installed legally. I could practically hear Karen's smug voice as I read the fine print. This wasn't just a rule change, it was a power grab. A desperate attempt to force me into submission. I immediately called my lawyer, Mark Reynolds, who confirmed what I already suspected. They can't just rewrite the rules and apply them retroactively to force you to remove something that was legal at the time of installation, he said. This is a clear abuse of power. That didn't stop the HOA from trying to financially strangle me into compliance. Within days, the fines escalated. Not just for the solar panels, but for everything they could possibly nitpick. A letter arrived stating that my grass was half an inch too long, violation. My trash bins were placed too far forward on the curb, violation. The minor cracks in my driveway? Suddenly labeled as a community hazard, requiring immediate repair under threat of another fine. And the worst part? The HOA had the audacity to threaten a lien on my house. I had seen HOA horror stories before, people losing their homes over unpaid fees that started as minor violations. That wasn't going to happen to me. But the next move Karen made pushed me beyond anger. One afternoon, while I was outside taking photos of my driveway for documentation, Karen stormed out of her house, phone in hand, and called the police on me. I stood there, stunned, as she put on a dramatic performance, telling the dispatcher I was stalking her and trespassing on private property. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up. "Sir, we got a call about a trespassing incident," one of the officers said as he stepped out, looking between me and Karen. I took a deep breath, holding my temper. "I'm on public property, officer. Just taking pictures of my own driveway." Karen, ever the HOA martyr, crossed her arms, voice trembling with fake distress. "He's been harassing me. Walking by my house, taking pictures, it's making me feel unsafe." I stared at her in disbelief. "You mean the way you and the HOA have been harassing me since the day I put up my solar panels?" The officer turned to me. "You live here?" "Yes," I said firmly. "And I have documentation proving that the HOA has been targeting me unfairly. I even have security footage of my solar panels being tampered with." Karen's face paled slightly. She hadn't expected me to come prepared. The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, unless you have evidence that he was on your property, I suggest you resolve your issues through proper HOA channels." Karen clenched her jaw, clearly furious that her attempt to weaponize the police against me had failed. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched back into her house, slamming the door behind her. That was it. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, I was done playing fair. I had been documenting everything, every fine, every threat, every ridiculous complaint. It was time to turn the tables. And I knew exactly how. A few days later, I reached out to a local news station that had covered HOA abuse cases before. I sent them my entire file of evidence, along with a personal account of what had been happening. When the reporter called me back, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Ethan, this is exactly the kind of story we've been looking for. I'd like to schedule an on-camera interview. People need to hear this." And just like that, the HOA's dirty tactics were about to be exposed to the entire community. The camera crew arrived at my house early in the morning. A journalist named Rachel Carter, sharp-eyed and eager, wasted no time setting up for the interview. As I sat in front of the bright studio lights, I could already feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about exposing the corruption of an HOA drunk on its own power. Rachel leaned forward with her microphone. "Ethan, tell us exactly what's been happening here." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "It all started when I installed solar panels on my home, a legal, fully permitted installation. But the HOA decided they didn't like it, and they've been harassing me ever since. First, they tried to claim the panels didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood. When that didn't work, they changed the rules and tried to force me to remove them. And when I still didn't back down, they started fining me for ridiculous violations, my grass length, my trash bins, even imaginary cracks in my driveway." Rachel's eyebrows raised. "And you believe this was targeted retaliation?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Without a doubt. I have security footage showing someone tampered with my solar panels. I reported it, and the HOA's response? Silence. But the moment I so much as took a photo of my own driveway, Karen called the police on me for trespassing." Rachel's expression hardened. "And what happened after that?" I leaned in. "That's where things get interesting." I reached into my folder and pulled out a stack of documents, printed spreadsheets, emails, scanned invoices. I started looking into HOA finances. And what I found was disturbing. Rachel flipped through the pages. "What am I looking at?" "Misused funds," I said. "Money that was supposed to be used for community improvements but was instead being funneled into administrative costs. Look at this, thousands of dollars paid to consultants with no real records of work done, inflated maintenance fees that don't match actual contractor invoices. And the worst part? Some of these payments lead directly back to HOA board members." Rachel's mouth parted slightly. "So you're saying The HOA isn't just harassing homeowners. They're stealing from them. That was the moment I knew I had them. The story aired that evening. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people flooded the HOA's website and social media pages, demanding answers. The news station's phone lines were jammed with homeowners sharing their own horror stories about Whitman, Karen, and the rest of the board, people who had been fined unfairly. People who had lost thousands due to fraudulent HOA fees. The next morning, Karen's smug face was nowhere to be seen. Instead, an emergency HOA meeting was announced. But this time, the board wasn't summoning me. They were scrambling to do damage control. I attended, not as a target, but as a witness to their downfall. The room was packed, a stark contrast to my first meeting. Neighbors who had once ignored me now whispered in hushed tones, their faces a mix of concern and anger. The air was tense. Even Whitman, who always carried himself with an air of control, looked visibly shaken. When he cleared his throat to speak, the usual arrogance was gone. We understand there have been some concerns raised regarding recent policies and financial management. Rest assured, we are conducting an internal review. A voice from the back of the room cut through the silence like a knife. Asterisk asterisk, we don't want your review. We want resignations, asterisk asterisk. Murmurs turned into outright agreement. One by one, homeowners stood up, demanding transparency, demanding refunds, demanding justice. Karen, for once in her life, was silent. Then someone pulled out their phone and held up the local news article, reading it out loud for the entire room to hear. The fraudulent expenses, the misuse of funds, the bogus fines, all of it. I watched as Karen's face turned pale. Whitman tried to regain control, holding up his hands. Let's not jump to conclusions. A neighbor interrupted, voice shaking with anger. You're the ones who jumped to conclusions. You've been bleeding us dry for years. Another voice shouted from the crowd. Asterisk asterisk, motion to remove the entire board. Effective immediately, asterisk asterisk. A roar of agreement echoed through the room. Whitman, now sweating, tried to push back. Now, let's be reasonable. Asterisk asterisk, where's the money, Whitman? Where did our HOA dues go, asterisk asterisk. And just like that, the walls came crashing down. An official vote was pushed forward on the spot, and when the results came in, it was unanimous, asterisk asterisk, the entire HOA board was dissolved, asterisk asterisk. Karen's jaw tightened, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. She didn't find one. Because she had lost. I didn't say a word as she stormed out of the room. She wouldn't be calling the shots anymore. The HOA was about to change. And this time, it wasn't going to be Karen's version of what's best for the community. In the days following the HOA's collapse, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer, like a weight had finally been lifted. The fines stopped. The threats disappeared. And most importantly, my solar panels remained exactly where they were, untouched. A formal letter arrived from the newly restructured HOA, officially retracting all previous demands. No more removal orders, no more fabricated violations. In fact, they went a step further, acknowledging that the previous board had abused its power and promising reforms to prevent it from happening again. They even mentioned updating the guidelines to allow solar panels permanently, so no homeowner would have to deal with the same nightmare I had just endured. I should have felt victorious, but part of me still couldn't believe how close I had come to losing everything, not just my solar panels, but my peace of mind, my security, even my home. If I hadn't fought back, if I had caved under their pressure like so many others before me, where would I be now? The thought made my stomach turn. One evening, as I stepped outside, I caught a familiar face standing at the edge of my driveway, Karen. Her once smug expression was gone, replaced with something almost unrecognizable, regret. She hesitated before speaking, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. She swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. I shouldn't have pushed it so far. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was wrong. I studied her, unsure whether to believe the sudden change of heart. Maybe the public humiliation had forced her to reflect. Or maybe, for the first time in her life, she had lost control and didn't know how to handle it. Either way, I didn't need her apology. I had already won. She left after that. I never saw her again. Some say she moved out of the neighborhood entirely, unwilling to live in a community she no longer controlled. As the months passed, life returned to normal. The HOA, now under new leadership, actually focused on helping homeowners instead of bullying them. And every time I stepped outside, I looked up at my solar panels, still standing strong, a reminder of everything I had fought for. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about standing up for my rights. And in the end, I had proven that power-hungry HOAs and people like Karen only win if you let them. So tell me, have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.